speaker is Jeff Bailey, who's a member of the ISO, the International Socialist Organization.
Like the other speakers, I just want to start by thanking Steve Bloom and Solidarity and the other organizers of tonight for pulling this together. And it is refreshing to see it as part of a series of meetings that have happened over the last couple of weeks. The Socialist ballot box meeting that Gloria mentioned, that Jacobin put together with ourselves and Socialist Alternative. And also, people may know the book launch for Michael and Debbie Smith's book, Imagine Living in a Socialist USA, that HarperCollins, of all publishers, is publishing next Monday at Housing Works. And I think it is exciting to be part of a moment where there's, after a difficult couple of years after the decline of Occupy, a sense of a new, renewed opening. And certainly a lot of credit to that has to go to the breakthrough in Seattle with the Swamp campaign. I think in trying to take stock of the question of the elections, all the other speakers mentioned, I think there are 4 important electoral campaigns that we need to take stock of they have some similarities but are quite different. You have de Blasio's election here in New York, the election of Chokwe Lumumba in Jackson, the Independent Labor Party elections in Ohio, and of course the Socialist Alternative campaigns, particularly in Seattle and Minneapolis. And on the one hand, I think in very different ways, they all tapped into and reflect the real anger that's burning out there around questions of inequality and racism and oppression and a whole series, the environment, a whole series of issues. And it's the same anger that generated the tremendous support for the Chicago Teachers Union strike, the struggles around the death of Trayvon Martin, the fast food strikes in New York, the hospital closure, fight against hospital closures that are taking place, the fight against stop and frisk, etc. But obviously, a number of the speakers mentioned those elections also have quite different relationship to the Democratic Party that I think we need to talk about and assess. The Socialist Alternative ran an open the Independent Socialist campaign. As Nick was mentioning, Lumumba ran as a Democrat, but obviously quite a different kind of Democrat with strong roots in radical revolutionary campaigns. The Ohio labor candidates were run specifically against the local Democratic Party, but not necessarily part of a longer-term strategy of building an independent party to the left of the Democrats. And then you have de Blasio, who in many ways is a more typical politician and represents in many ways the return of a more traditional liberalism to the Democratic Party in the context of neoliberalism. And I think in discussing it, one basic thing I think we have to start with is figuring out which steps are steps towards a left that's independent of the Democratic Party, and which are attempts to bring us back into the fold. And I want to talk in particular about de Blasio, obviously because we're located in New York. And I think de Blasio in a lot of ways is an opportunity and a real challenge for the left over the next 4 years. It's an opportunity because clearly his campaign tapped into the tremendous class anger in this city, and the idea that we do live in a tale of 2 cities. This New York, this city we live in is truly 2 cities, one for the rich and one for the rest of us. But without tackling the issue of wealth redistribution, you can't really tackle the question of inequality. And de Blasio, whether or not he wants to, is not within the Democratic Party, is not going to be able to raise that most basic question of wealth redistribution. And there is an opportunity there for the left to organize around some of those issues and push them forward, because at its core, de Blasio doesn't have a different urban model than Bloomberg does. They obviously they'll fight over the percentages that go where, but it's striking how widespread the idea that the way you build a city is by putting forward what is beneficial to business. And you may argue that more of those crumbs get handed down to working people, but there's a large agreement that anything that is going to impinge on the profits of Wall Street and not be amenable to them if we can't convince them to do it is outside the realm of debate. And I think one of the lessons, not only of the Socialst campaign in Seattle, but certainly also some of the much larger struggles taking place internationally, even the struggles taking place in Greece and within the Syriza party in Greece, is that the left cannot move forward unless it's able to break with that model and put forward an alternative one that sets basic priorities for working class people, regardless of whether they're going to impinge on the profits of big business and capital. And in that sense, I think we have to say, de Blasio is both, Nick was saying de Blasio in many ways is a reflection of kind of the fragmentation that's happening inside the Democratic Party, and I think that's true, but he's both a reflection of and a reaction to it on the part of the Democratic Party. And I think that's the challenge for the left as well, is whether de Blasio will be able to use his links to progressive movements as a way of reining back in movements as they run up against what the Democratic Party, even the liberal wing of the Democratic Party, accepts as what's possible. And we've already seen that around a couple of issues with the appointment of Bratton as police commissioner, which created a fracture within criminal justice work, where a number of groups that had been central to organizing against stop and frisk then came out and said, well, maybe this is the best we can do, and he's better than Kelly. And it's a step, how low our sights have been dropped, that Bratton seems like a step forward from what came before. But we're also seeing it with the appointment of Carmen Farina as school chancellor, which is opening up a big debate within teachers and education groups about whether this is a step forward or something that needs to be challenged. And I'll leave that open for the discussion, but I think that's an important debate that the left needs to be a part of. Because ultimately we need a left that doesn't limit its sights to supporting the best of what's possible. But one that can project an alternative vision, not only for what a radical agenda and progressive agenda would look like for New York, but what one might look like in this country and internationally. I think in New York there's some basic things we can begin to talk about and organize around, which are campaigns that are already being organized around. Certainly the campaign for a $15 an hour minimum wage as a step towards economic development that benefits working people instead of developers and big business. I think putting forward a real plan of what a genuine affordable housing policy would look like in the city, one that puts the needs of working class people and poor people ahead of the needs of developers to make a profit. A campaign for decriminalization and for jobs for youth, and particularly youth of color, as part of a fight to end stop and frisk. And finally, I think putting forward the basic argument that the money's out there. And I think that's kind of a simple thing to say, but one that, because our sights have been so lowered, is often, I think, a stumbling block for a lot of activists to challenge the limitations placed on us by the Democratic Party, which is to simply say, when they need to find the money, they can always find it for their projects. But when it comes to ours, then suddenly there's a budget crisis. We need to go through in some detail and show that the money's there and how we could take it back. And I think all of this requires the ability to both remain independent from the Democrats, and where possible, run our own candidates, while at the same time working with those who haven't yet broken with them within the social movements that we're involved in. And I think it requires, on the left, a combination of collaboration around electoral issues and collaboration around the grassroots organizing that provides the foundations, as all of the speakers have talked about, for those campaigns. So I think electorally, immediately, we should talk about collaboration around Howie Hawkins' campaign, not only because he's going to raise key issues that we're talking about here tonight, but I think that the limits of de Blasio are also going to raise the questions of the Democrats in Albany, which is already de Blasio and Farina are saying we can't touch standardized testing because really that's Albany. We can't raise taxes because that's Albany. And I think Howie's campaign even if it doesn't win, can put the left in a stronger position to take on some of those arguments, which is to say we can't fight for these things in New York and then support the people in Albany that are preventing us from winning them. And ultimately, if you take that logic forward, it points the need for an independent left alternative to the Democratic Party. And then we need to talk about collaboration around particular grassroots struggles. I think the fight around hospital closures, the fast food workers' struggles, the petition that's circulating to get retroactive pay for union workers that de Blasio's been blocking, stop and frisk, and also I would just say one of the important things that I think is beginning to come out of the system change, not climate change, is some of the proposals for an Earth Day to May Day series of events, just to try to link the environmental movement with workers' struggles this year. All of those, I think, are sites where the left can come together and begin to talk about, in a very concrete, immediate sense, possibilities for further collaboration. And that puts us on a stronger basis for talking about more long-term projects. And I would just second what the other speakers have said, which is for all of us, certainly at the front of this room, and I think many of us in the room as a whole, this discussion of campaigns and electoral work is also a stepping stone to talking about a larger discussion in the city and in this country about a more radical, revolutionary transformation in our society that's absolutely necessary. So thank you, and thanks for putting together this panel. It's nice to see you.